Thank you. Thank you very much for such a welcome. My presentation might be slightly different. I will hope that I can. So it will be maybe slightly different because as you mentioned, I've been working on the concept of negation in the school of Vaiyakaranas, particularly later period of later commentaries, to see how it developed. So it doesn't necessarily focus on Panini's interpretation, but I do hope that you'll find it interesting. The presentation is from nivrttapadarthka to aropa. What grammarians are saying on negation, you can see a certain shift in the understanding or in the cognition or just interpretation of the concept. And the reason why I even started being interested in negation is, so I would like to quote something that I read in one of the books by foreign scholars. The negation is a sine qua non of every human systems of animal communication. It is what makes us human, to misrepresent, lie, and this is in our own existence is something that actually find. We often, especially when we talk about Indian culture, we say that it's the culture of a word, that shabda, vach is the beginning, is the root of it all, and it of course is. But when you look at different Vedic descriptions in Vedic literature, whether it's Nasadiya, whether it's Shatapatha Brahmana, you very often find that the inability to describe the world we live in, the beginnings of our world, is because of this. We use negative expression in the center of interest also for philosophers and grammarians. And so I would like to give a couple of examples in my presentation of how the interpretation of negation developed from what we find in Panini's. Because what we do, this division, the basic division into prasadya and paryodasa, in what we would call in the West non-implicative or predicate and term negation, implicative negation. This division is generally adopted, accepted, and continued in later literature. Find out about how he refers to negation. He in his Sutra 9, he just refers to negative compounds and says that they are tatpurusha types of compounds. So this is the rule that allows us to form such expressions as brahmana, aneka, adrishta, whether they are purely nominal or they can be also connected with an action at times. So basically, a negation in those kinds of expressions, it performs the attributive function. It serves as a qualifier. So we have this vishesha visheshana bhava present in all those expressions. And this is the line, this vishesha visheshana bhava is the line that later commentators follow. But there is a certain limitation or change in the interpretation, as we'll see, because for Panini, when Panini classifies his compounds, he uses various criteria for this. They are morphological, they are sometimes semantic, they are formal criteria. But starting with Patanjali, we see this threefold compound classification based on headedness or semantic predominance or headedness of a compound. So where do we find the head, the semantic head in a compound? And while in many Sanskrit compounds that is of course an interesting topic, but the head is might be easier to find. In the case of negative compounds, that is problematic on a semantic level, because what we do have is, in case of, as we can see, a brahmana or aneka, we have an entity, brahmana, that is an existing entity that is being qualified by non-existence. So we have the being that is qualified by non-being, and that poses a lot of confusion. Most, I think linguistically, but also cognitively, of course, when you think about that. So what Patanjali comes up with is this threefold compound classification. It's either the latter former, the external member of a compound that is a predominant one. So we have uttara padartha pradhanya, purva padartha pradhanya, and anya padartha pradhanya. Of course, he discusses all of them in the case of 9 samasa, but he ultimately goes with Uttarapadartha Pradhanya, because that, of course, agrees with, as I mentioned, he opted for Uttarapadartha Pradhanya because that follows Panini's. This is basically what the commentators are trying to conform with, to find a solution that is semantically viable and it still does not violate the Ashtadhyayi. Later commentators, as we can see, such as Kayata, for example, there's a comment where he says that it doesn't really matter that all three options are possible, and we can all adopt them, whether we adopt Uttara Padartha Pradhanya, Purva Padartha Pradhanya, or Anya Padartha Pradhanya. They can all be explained. We just choose Uttara Padartha Pradhanya because this causes the fewest problems with the interpretation. So what Patanjali does, he says, Iha apitarhi nany visheshakah prayojyate, tena nany vishishtasya nayanam bhavishyati, kah punarasav nivrttapadarthka. This is what happens. What happens is that we lose the meaning of the word Brahmana. It's the meaning has been removed, and it's actually this term nivrttapadarthka is something that does not, I think, maybe only once appears in the Mahabhashya from what I heard, from what I checked. This is not a common term. This is the extent to which Patanjali goes. So for him, it's the removal of a particular meaning, and this removal of the original meaning is brought to our attention by the use of the particle nine. And this is where Patanjali and later commentators differ, because when we look at what Kayata says, and this 11th century seems to be a common denominator for certain changes in thinking of on negation, and I'm pretty sure negation is just one of the examples of this shift in thinking, is because what Kayata says, commenting on this very passage in the Mahabhashya, he says, "Nain vishishtasyeti aropita brahmanasya kshatriyadar iti arthah kah puna rasaviti bhava bhavayor virodha nany vishishto brahmanartho naupapadyate iti bhava nivrttapadarthka iti nivrettah padartho mukhyam brahmanyam yasmin cha kshatriyade arthah satrihyadina aropita brahmanyo nine dyotita vastha iti arthah." Term aropita is used. This is where Kayata starts to differ, maybe expand, elaborate on, deviate from what Patanjali was saying. So it's not merely the removal of the meaning. What we have here is superimposition of one meaning onto another. What we have to emphasize here, and I had a discussion about this with Professor Omar Harkulkarni a few weeks ago, whether it's a cognitive process, whether it happens in our minds, or it's somehow related to. And I think, it does act in a couple of commentaries. It definitely Helaraja in his commentary on the Vaiyakaranas mentions that this is all Buddhist. But this is also implied by Kayata's own comment that evam tarhi padartha pratyaya eva upacharat padartha shabdena uchyate. So this whole process of how we analyze, interpret negative compounds, how this whole process happens is all in our heads. There's various steps that we go through, and I will try to show those steps beginning. So for Kayata introduces this notion of Kayata differs from Patanjali is that what happens is that we create and we impose this idea onto a kshatriya. So, and then we need to use nine in order to remove this primary meaning from our notion and to show that Brahmana is not used in its primary meaning. This notion of primary and secondary meanings that are inherent in a word and are revealed by negation is something that's actually very, very interesting, and I think not really maybe properly explored by Western linguistics. This is where we can tap into the potential of Sanskrit studies, I believe. And the reason why Kayata dwells on this is because he finds that the existence and non-existence are somehow inherent in an object, and we need nine to be able to distinguish and to show which meaning of that should surface. It's the existence of Brahmana or non-existence of Brahmanya. Now, it's the commentary from the 11th century, but when we take a step back a little, and we see that the term aropa, the notion of aropatva, is not present much earlier. I mean, it does appear in the Vakyapadiya occasionally, but it's not used in the context of and it's not how Kashika is very succinct on. But when we look at two commentaries to Kashika, we notice differences. He follows what Patanjali was saying. He focuses on the error, on the erroneous cognition that leads to the use of negative compounds in the first place. And when he talks about the meaning, he again uses the term nivrttapadarthka that was used by Patanjali. He does not refer to aropa, aropita, aropatva in any way. He says, abrahmanam anaya iti ukte, brahmana matrasya anayanam prapnoti. Atha nivrttapadarthka yam brahmana shabda. Sacha nivrittih swabhaviki nanya dyotyata iti matam. So that he says again, referring to a discussion that we find in the Mahabhashya, that the word loses its meaning. And this nivritti is a natural, it happens on its own accord, but it has to be revealed with the help of nine. There is no superimposition for Jinendra Buddhi. So we can assume that in the 9th century, even if it was known to grammarians, the idea that we can superimpose the meaning, one meaning or another, in order to, and then negate that original meaning, in order to, and this is how the process of interpretation of negative compounds occurs. Even if it was known in the 9th century, even if it was present, it didn't make it to, at least to the Kashika Vritti and to its commentary. So this is quite a late commentary. But what we do is that Jinendra Buddhi still focuses, as I mentioned, on the mistakes. He mentions two types of knowledge that we have. That one is the correct one is mithya jnana. And this mithya jnana prompts us, it's the basis for using negative compounds in the first place. We need a mistake in order to use negation. It's slightly different in Haradatta's Padamanjari, because it's again the 11th century, and so what we see in Haradatta Padamanjari is that nivrttapadarthka originated in the Mahabhashya is explained similarly to Kayata and also Helaraja that I haven't shown, but we can find it as well. Nivrttapadarthko atra brahmana shabdah sacha nivrittih swabhaviki nanyadyotyate kevala brahmano shabdah prayujyamanah prasiddhi vashan mukhyam eva brahmana machaste naim prayogenatu kshatriyadau sadrishina nimittena adhyaropitam brahmanyam natattukam iti dyotyate. So again, this is a mental process that happens, and we superimpose one meaning or another, and then we correct the whole procedure by using the word nine. So what I found interesting is that, to conclude, is there are certain features we find when we follow the discussion on negation in Panini's literature, in Paninian literature, that is in a way parallel or different from the division into prasadya and paryudasa, and this is one, of course, topic that we can observe throughout centuries. But first of all, that for Patanjali, the basis for using negative compounds, negative expressions of the sort, is a mistake. It's an erroneous cognition or a faulty instruction that prompts us to use a negative expression, and the word loses its meaning naturally, and this loss is revealed by a negative particle, and this is observable until Haradatta in the 9th century, and the shift happens in the 10th or 11th century when the change in interpretation is seen in the works of Kayata, Jinendra Buddhi, Helaraja, and of course later commentators refer to that as well, when the notion of aropa is introduced to explain how this nivrttapadarthka happens. And what's interesting as well is this process, because the examples that I gave, the Abrahmana, Aneka, they are mostly Paryudasa examples. well, both of them are Paridasa examples. In the case of Prasadya, we observe a two-tier process of how we first apply a role, for example, and then we negate it. But a similar process can be observed also when we analyze Paridasa examples, and this is how I think this is how grammarians later on start to approach it. So this first step is a mistake, incorrect information, erroneous cognition, and then there is the superimposition of a wrongful notion onto an object, and then correction. So actually, when you look at those two types of negation, they later on seem to start being analyzed technically in a similar fashion of how we interpret that. Thank you very much.